Well, let's get started. The name of our course is Anatomy and Physiology, which combines two disciplines. We study anatomy, which is the description of the structure of a part of the body, such as the names of the parts of the eye, and physiology, which explains how the eye actually operates, allowing us to see. So you see on the bottom of the screen here, 4 words: anatomy, physiology, cytology, and histology. These are just different disciplines which deal with the human body. Anatomy is a study of structure, as I said. It's what the parts are called and where they are. And physiology is how they work. So if you're interested in the stomach, you're interested in the structure of the stomach, all the different parts of it. And then how does it actually digest proteins? That's the physiology part. Cytology is the study of cells, and we are made of cells. Our body contains over 17 trillion cells. That's trillion. 1 trillion is a million. So 17 million cells. That's a lot of cells. And a cytologist studies the structure and function of those cells. Cyto actually means cell. Histology is the study of what happens when cells work together as teams. One cell can't do, like, for example, pick up your lower arm as a muscle cell. You need many cells working as a team to do that. And cells, similar cells like muscle cells working together as a team are called tissues. And the study of tissues is called histology. So we have these different disciplines. Now let's take a look at how the body is organized. At the most basic level, we are composed of chemicals, such as water, proteins, fats, carbohydrates, DNA, RNA, etc. That's the chemical level. All those chemicals put together, if you actually had to buy them in a chemical store, would cost you about $18. So our body is worth about $18 chemically. But the chemicals work together. And these chemicals can be made to work together to create cell parts, such as the cell membrane, the nucleus, and among others parts of the cell. These cell parts each have a specific function, and when they work in unison, they become a living cell. And so chemicals working together can become the parts of a cell. And when those parts work together, they become cells, and cells are actually alive. Our cells are individually living things living inside of our body, working together to make us exist. That's the cellular level. But cells aren't, the human body just by themselves. Cells can work together as teams to perform more complex operations, such as binding bones together at joints. These are tissues. There are only 4 major types of tissues. Epithelium tissue, which covers and lines organs and is even our outer skin. Connective tissue gives the body the ability to hold itself together, such as the ligaments and tendons. Muscle tissue obviously allows the body to move, and nervous tissue allows for overall coordination of all the body processes. These 4 tissues can combine to form organs, such as the stomach. Organs can work together to form and create systems, such as the digestive system. That's the stomach working together with other organs, such as the esophagus and the liver and the pancreas and the intestines. But we're not just a system, we are a number of systems. And finally, all the systems work together as a well-oiled machine called the organism. And that's what we are. So the human body is an organism made of about 11 systems working together as teams. The systems themselves are made of organs. Organs are made of tissues, and tissues are made of cells, and the cells are made out of about $17 worth of chemicals. These are the human body systems. The integumentary system is the skin and anything associated with the skin. That would be like your nails and the various glands that are in the skin. Skeletal system obviously is all your bones and joints, and they form the scaffold, which kind of holds you together inside and gives you support. The muscular system is of all the muscles in your body, and they allow you to move, but not just move voluntarily. You have involuntary muscles too, such as the muscles that churn the food in your stomach, or or beats your heart. All about movement. Then you have the nervous system, which coordinates all of this, the brain, the spinal cord, and all the various wires or nerves that go through everywhere in your body, so your brain can control what's going on. The endocrine system is all your internal glands, things like the pancreas, the thyroid, the pituitary gland, the ovaries, and the testes, and they make hormones, and the hormones also help to control the activities of your body. The cardiovascular system is your heart, blood vessels, and blood cells. And of course, its major job is to transport the various substances from one part of the body to another. For example, the food coming out of your intestines has to be transported to every cell in your body so that the cells can use the food for energy. The lymphatic system is a system of chemicals that leak out of your blood vessels. This is water and salts and various other things. And also they contain lots of white blood cells, which helps you in your immune system. Because your capillaries, the smallest part of your blood vessels, they leak liquid. The liquid is called lymph. It actually oozes out of the capillaries, and it keeps the inside of your body moist outside of the blood vessels. And then the lymphatic system actually sucks up that lymph and brings it back into the blood. So you constantly have this leakage of clear fluid coming out of your capillaries and then being sucked back into your blood at about the same rate. That keeps your body moist inside and keeps the fluid in your body cavities. Respiratory system is your lungs and your trachea and various things associated with that. That has to do with breathing, and it's giving you oxygen and getting rid of the carbon dioxide waste that your cells make. The digestive system is a system that doesn't give you much energy. In fact, it uses energy. You get tired after eating a lot of food, but it has to break down the food into particles so small that they can dissolve in your bloodstream. And so that's what the digestive system's job is to break down the food into smaller particles. The urinary system gets rid of waste that your cells make. The waste goes into your blood, and the kidneys remove that waste, things like urea and salts, and also a lot of extra water. And that also becomes your urine so that you can keep this waste from accumulating inside your body and causing disease. And finally, the one system that you don't really need to stay alive is your reproductive system. The species needs it in order to keep humans on the planet, but a person can live all their lives without reproducing. So those are the systems, and we're going to look at them one at a time as the course goes by in the next 16 or 15 weeks. Now, directional terms means, how do you talk about where things are in your body? If you work for a doctor's office or you're in the medical field, they use these terms all the time, and so you need to know them in order to survive in the field. If something is said to be anterior, it means it's toward the front of something. Ventral means the same thing. So your belly button is towards your front of your body, so it's anterior. Your stomach and abdomen, you can see from the front of your body, is anterior. Your nose is anterior. It's in the front of your head. And ventral means the same thing. It means toward the front. Posterior is just the opposite. That's your back. And dorsal means that. It's kind of like the dorsal fin on a shark. It means it's on his back. And that would be things like, your shoulder blades and all those kind of things that are inside on the back of you. Superior means above something. Cephalad is just a word that we use sometimes in zoology. We're not going to use that one too much in our course, but we're just going to call them superior. For example, if you have a vena cava, which is a large vein that drains blood from your head back into your heart, that's above the heart. So we call that the superior vena cava. There's another one that drains blood from below the heart, and that one goes in the same part of your heart, but it's called the inferior vena cava. So that means that one is above the heart, one's below the heart. Now, these words like superior and inferior mean above and below all the time. It doesn't matter if you're upside down. If you're upside down, your superior vena cava is still above your heart. It all has to do with you standing up straight. If you're standing up straight and what they call the anatomical position, you are going to say something is superior or inferior, always the same. If you're lying down, your head is still superior to your knees. If you're upside down, your head is still superior to your knees. It just means that that's how it is when you're standing up. Medial means toward the middle of something, like your nose or your belly button. Lateral means toward the side, kind of like your ears. Now, parietal and visceral. A lot of parts of your body have an outside part, sort of a membrane that surrounds it, and another membrane that surrounds it closer to it. So you have like two membranes that wrap around things. For example, your heart has two membranes called pericardia. Pericardia means around the heart. They're membranes. These membranes are kind of like, for now, we'll just think of them as like plastic wrap, and they go around the heart. Now, the visceral one is actually the one that's actually closest to the heart. It's actually touching the heart. It's retaining to the heart, the internal organ. Then there's another one that's on the outside of that. So it's almost like putting the heart in a small plastic bag, and that would be the visceral pericardium that surrounds the heart. And then putting that plastic bag into a bigger plastic bag, and you'll have an outside membrane, and that's the parietal membrane, the outer boundary. It's important to have these two membranes around these organs because that in between them is a gooey fluid called serous fluid. And when the heart beats, it's actually cushioned by that fluid in between the two membranes so it doesn't wear itself out. Your lungs also have a parietal and visceral membrane, and there's a fluid in between them. So when your lungs breathe, they're cushioned by the fluid in between the two membranes around the lungs, and they don't wear themselves out. External means superficial, like a scratch or something like that on your skin. And internal is deep. That means like if you step on a nail or something like that. Proximal usually and distal usually refers to your limbs. If you think of your elbow and compare it to your wrist, when you're standing up, your elbow is closer to your midline of your body than your wrist is. So you would say the elbow is proximal to the wrist. The wrist would be distal to the elbow. It's further away. If you're comparing the wrist with the fingers, you would say that the wrist is proximal and the fingers are distal, because the wrist is closer to the midline than the fingers are. So proximal means closer to the sort of midline of your body when you're standing up, and distal means further away. Central, again, it means similar to medial. It just means near or at the center of something. You can say your pupil in your eye is central. And peripheral means away from the center, like your peripheral vision, looking from at the side of something. Those terms are used all the time in medicine, so you should become aware of them. Now, the next part of this lesson here is all about what you call various parts of the body. And here's a little diagram that shows some of them, but we're going to go through it, one step at a time. First, we're going to talk about the head and neck of your body. If you say something is cephalic, cephalic means your head, anything that's to do with your head. So somebody can say you have a cephalic injury, that means you have a head injury. And it could be very serious. Cervical has to do with your neck, because the neck vertebrae are called cervical vertebrae, and they're inside your neck. So if you have a cervical injury and you're going into a hospital or emergency room, that could be because of a car accident or something like that, and you damaged your neck. A cranial means similar to cephalic, but it refers to the top of your head. So cephalic can be any part of your head, but cranial means the top of your head, the brain area. So if somebody says you have a cranial injury, that could be much more serious. Facial is obvious, that's your face. And then we have the anterior trunk, the front of your body. The abdominal region is the region between your lowest ribs and your pelvis. In other words, your abs. A lot of people think they have six packs there, which are really just muscles. The pelvic region is the region enclosed by the pelvic bones. pelvic bones being basically the hips down there at the bottom of the cavity. But sometimes there's really no boundary between the abdominal region of your body and the pelvic region of the body, unless you make a sort of an imaginary line across your hips. And so sometimes they just call that whole area from the bottom of your ribs all the way down to the bottom of your cavity is the abdominal pelvic region. It's both the abdominal and pelvic regions. The inguinal region is your groin. Right lower than that is the muscles that can sometimes be strained really bad when you're sort of sliding into second base. And pectoral means your chest. Thoracic also means chest, so you might see that word now and then. But pectoral, that's why the muscles there are called pectoralis muscles. And again, knowing some of these words helps you understand and learn the names of the parts of the body that are in there. So pectoral means chest, pectoralis are the muscles in there. The sternal is the very center of your chest. And again, the bone there is called your sternum. And that one's very hard, and it's actually protecting your heart, which is right behind it. In the back, you have your dorsum, which is the whole back of your body, the back of the chest area, I should say. The gluteal region is your butt. And the reason that humans have such large butts is because the muscles in there are called gluteus muscles again, and they help you stand up straight, especially when you're running or walking. The lumbar region is the lower part of your back, and you have the largest vertebrae there. There's no ribs on them. And they also, because we stand up straight, they take a lot of stress because the whole upper part of your body weight is on them. And so a lot of people who have back problems are because they have issues with their lumbar vertebrae in the lower back. And the sacral region is the region right over the bone called the sacrum, which is that hard bone right above your butt. And you'll see what that is more when we take a look at the skeletons later on in the course. The vertebral region is the region right in the middle of your back where the vertebrae are. In the lateral trunk, which means the side of your body, you have armpits. And believe it or not, there is actually a name for them. They're called the axillary region. Again, knowing things helps because in that region, you have an artery that goes down into your arm from your upper chest. And that is called the axillary artery. And you have an axillary vein too. Coxal has to do with your hips. The genital region obviously is the external reproductive organs of a girl or a boy. And the perineal region is the region between your anus and reproductive organs, right between your legs. They say a boy has a little line there. If you have a baby boy and you're changing his diaper, you might be able to see a little line between his legs. They say that's the closed up vagina that he used to have because all babies start out as girls. And then they change into boys as they develop, if they're going to be boys. And they leave behind some of the female structures that they started to make. And that's that line between his leg. And now we have arms, the upper extremities. You have antebrachial, which is your forearm. In this case, anti means in front of. So brachial means the upper arm. So in front of the upper arm is your lower arm. And so that's why it's called antebrachial. And then we have antecubical, which is the front of your elbow. That's that part where the arm bends and where a phlebotomist actually sucks blood out of your vein there. The cubital region is the actual elbow in the back of your arm, and the brachial region is your upper arm. That's where they take your blood pressure from. Carpal means wrist, and I'm sure many of you have remembered or know about carpal tunnel syndrome, which is an issue when the blood vessels and nerves that go through the wrist into the hand actually are squeezed a little bit, and the hand falls asleep. Digital is your fingers, pollux is your thumb, and palmar obviously is the palm of your hand. In the legs, we have the word crural, which means leg itself. Digital are your toes. Femoral, very important one, that's your thigh. And again, underneath that skin in your thigh, there's the femoral artery, and the bone is called a femur. And so you can see knowing some of these terms of what the parts of the body are referred to helps you understand or learn what's inside them. The patella is your knee. Again, the patella is that bone. The kneecap is called the patella. Popliteal area is the back of your knee, that little part of your knee when you bend your, it's a little ticklish when you bend your leg back behind your knee. Pedal is your foot, and like pollex is your thumb, the hallux is your toe, your big toe. And finally, the plantar or planar is the sole of your foot. Sometimes they do put a T in there and say plantar, and that's the very bottom of your foot. Some people get warts there, especially if they walk barefoot a lot, because warts are caused by viruses that can get into your skin. And if you're barefoot, they have a way to get in. And so you get a plantar wart, and sometimes that could be very painful to walk on. Now, planes, let's take a look at this. You know that all of your organs are not symmetrical. They're not even. If you cut the heart in one direction and you look inside it, you'll see it in a certain way. If you cut the heart in a different direction, it'll look different. And so we have to know how things were cut. So if you take a look at our little guy here, we can say that we can slice him right down the middle, see, like that. Make equal right and left sides. That's called a mid-sagittal section. And if you're doing that with the brain, obviously you get a right and left side of the brain, and the right and left side of the abdomen and the chest. If it's mid-sagittal, it's right down the middle, and the belly button would be right there in the middle. Also, you could have just sagittal, which means anywhere else. So you can still cut them up and down like this, but not exactly in the middle. And if you did that, that would be called sagittal. Transverse means if you cut him this way, across. A transverse section would obviously, if you cut the heart that way, or the brain that way, it would look very different from the way you would cut it this way, sagittally. And so when you look at an organ that's sliced so you can see inside of it, you should kind of have to know how it was cut. Is it a transverse section or is it a sagittal section? And finally, there's a third way that you could actually cut something, and that's front and back. So if I have this is like a sort of a razor blade, if you want, and it goes right down the middle of them. So you're creating a front part, and on the back of the screen, a back part. In this case, in the transverse one, you're creating a superior and an inferior section. So we can use our directional terms. In this case, you're creating a anterior or ventral section. And then the back, when you cut them in half from the other side, then it's a posterior or dorsal section. So again, the way you cut it matters. If you're cutting an organ one way or another, it's kind of like looking at a pepperoni. You know, if you cut it across, it's going to just look like a flat snake. If you cut it transversely, it's going to look like little circles that you would put on pizza. So it depends on how things are cut. And this is called a coronal or a frontal section. So you have sagittal, transverse, coronal. Now, what about the cavities in your body? You are a hollow organ. I mean, you're a hollow organism. And so your organs live in these cavities, in these spaces. Your biggest cavity is your ventral cavity. The ventral cavity is all this blue here, all of it, the big blue spaces in there. And that's broken up into three parts. You have a thoracic cavity up here where your heart and your lungs are. Then you have a diaphragm muscle, which helps you breathe, and that's the boundary. And then underneath that, you have your abdominal cavity here. And the abdominal cavity is where your stomach is and your liver and most of your intestines and your spleen and things like that, and your pancreas. But there's no boundary here between the abdominal and pelvic cavity. So just below your hips is your pelvic cavity, and that would be where you have your bladder and reproductive organs. So a lot of people, as I said, they use this as an abdominal pelvic region. They just combine them. On the other side, you have your dorsal cavity. The dorsal cavity goes down your back, and the dorsal cavity is broken up into two parts. You have your cranial cavity up here, where your brain lives, and then your spinal cord goes down through your spine all the way down your back, inside the center of the spine. So everything in the dorsal cavity is surrounded by bone because it's so important, and you can't really hurt it without really severely damaging the body. So the skull obviously protects the cranial cavity, and your vertebrae or your spine protects your spinal cavity that your spinal cord is inside of. Again, over in the ventral side, you have no bones that protect the organs in your abdominal cavity. But up in the thoracic portion, you do have your ribs that helps protect the heart and lungs. So those are the cavities that your body has. Now, the dorsal cavity, as I said, contains your brain and spinal cord. Your ventral cavity, it has thoracic, which is your heart and lungs, enclosed by a rib cage for protection. And the abdominal pelvic, or combination of the abdomen and pelvic cavities, contains your abdominal, which houses your stomach and intestines, liver, gallbladder, etc., and the pelvic one, which has your bladder, rectum, and your reproductive organs in it. Now, what about the heart? Like I said before, the heart is surrounded by two membranes. They're called pericardia. And one of them is called parietal, that's the outer one. And the inner one that actually touches the heart is called visceral. And they have this sort of oily, serous fluid between them. And that gives it a cushion when the heart beats. They're derived from the mediastinum. Now, the mediastinum is the space between the lungs. And that's where your heart actually lives. That little space between your lungs, smack in the middle of your chest, is where your heart is. Now, these two membranes, the pericardia that actually are wrapped around your heart, the parietal one is the outside one, and the visceral one is the closer one to the heart. And it has that oily, serous fluid between them to protect the heart while it's beating. And here's a picture. This is the mediastinum area right in here. That's the mediastinum right in there. That's where your heart is. And lots of other things like your esophagus goes through there and your trachea. Now, this is a very nice picture. Shows you a couple of things. This is your lung here on this side. And if you see it, you can see here there's two membranes, one on the outside and one on the inside, that are surrounding your lungs. And in between the two membranes, you have that black stuff. It's really not black, it's just black in the diagram. And that's that oily fluid, the serous fluid. In the lungs, the membranes are called pleura. So you have on the outside, you have a parietal pleura, outside one. And then the one that actually touches the lung is called the visceral pleura, right here, parietal and visceral. And it's very important that that stays fluid in here. So when the chest expands, the lung can expand with it. If air got in there, the chest would expand, but the air would expand inside between the two membranes, and the lung wouldn't. And that's called a collapsed lung. You can't get air in between the two membranes, because then the lung would not be able to expand when you try to breathe air in. And the heart, you see here, here's the heart. And again, you have two membranes that surround the heart. The outer one here, that's the parietal pericardium. And the one that actually is in contact with the heart is the visceral pericardium. And again, when the heart beats, it's cushioned by the fluid in between the two membranes. Here we have a picture of a transverse section through your abdomen, right through the middle of you. And you see here on the outside, there's your vertebra. On the outside, you have a parietal pericardium that wraps around the entire body cavity. That's your abdominal body cavity. And when it gets toward the back, it comes forward and then wraps around an organ. And that holds the organ in place. And between here and here, this is the outer one and the inner one, parietal, visceral, is fluid. These pericardia are kind of tough. They're made of mostly connective tissue, so they are kind of like saran wrap or plastic wrap, and they're pretty hard to break. And they hold the organs in place. And you can see the same thing is happening here. You have two organs being held in place by these membranes, so they don't fall to the bottom of your body cavity. But interestingly, the kidneys are not in the space. The pericardium that surrounds the body cavity here does not go around the kidneys. The kidneys are in the back of them. So they have this funny name called retroperitoneal, means behind the pericardium. They're because of that, they're pretty close to the outside of the body. So it's pretty hard to, pretty easy, I should say, to damage the kidney. Then finally, we have a little bit of physiology here. Metabolism is all of your chemical reactions that happen in your body simultaneously to keep all the things going, keep you alive. Some of the chemical reactions are what they call anabolic. Anabolism is when you have chemical reactions that take small molecules and build them up into bigger ones. For example, a protein is really what they call a polymer. It's made of many little molecules joined together. To make a protein, you have to build it. And you build it by using these small molecules called amino acids. And you take these amino acids and you join them together, create different kinds of proteins. Because you're building up a molecule from smaller ones, it's like building a brick wall. You're using energy to do that, and that's called anabolism. You also build lots of other molecules. You build big polysaccharides, you build fats and all kinds of things. Whenever you build these big molecules, you're doing anabolism. But in some cases in your body, you want to break down those molecules and turn them back into the smaller ones. In other words, let the brick wall collapse. And when that happens, it's a catabolic reaction. For example, when you want to take, let's say, glucose or sugar, and you put it into one of your cell parts to break down for energy, to burn up and react with oxygen to release its energy so we can live, you're breaking the glucose up into smaller particles called carbon dioxide and water. And that's called catabolism. And that is something that releases energy. So anabolism is all the processes in your body that build up molecules and make big molecules from small ones. And catabolism is the one that actually breaks them down and takes them apart. And that anabolism uses energy and catabolism gives you energy. Homeostasis is a really important word. A lot of things in your body have to be in control. You can't let them get too high. You can't let them get too low. And so, for example, you have things like body temperature. Your body temperature in Fahrenheit should be 98.6 or around there. It can't get much higher and much lower to keep you alive. So you have all sorts of mechanisms in your body to try and maintain that body temperature around 98. Also, the blood glucose level in your blood, that has to be a certain amount. Too much, you would have diabetes. You'd be very sick. And too little, you wouldn't have enough energy. So it's very important to keep that at the right number. So you have these mechanisms to keep the glucose from getting too high and getting too low. It's kind of similar to your thermostat in your house. If you have a thermostat in your house, if you want to keep it at, say, 65, 70 degrees, you set it for that. And if the temperature goes lower than that, it turns on the furnace and makes the temperature go back up to 70. But once it gets past that point, it turns off the furnace and makes it the temperature drop a little bit. And when it gets lower again, the furnace turns back on again, on and off to keep the temperature right where you want it to be. When you do that, when you control something, if it gets too high, you do something to lower it. And if it gets too low, you do something to raise it. In your body, that's called negative feedback. And it's a very important way of controlling things in your body, like things like even cholesterol. Positive feedback is very different. I'll give you an example of that. Look at this little kid blowing up a balloon. He's putting more and more air every breath, pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing until something dramatic has to happen to stop him. And that is obviously when the balloon explodes. An example of that in the human body is, let's say, the ovary of a woman. In the ovary, there's a little part called a follicle. It's like a little pimple, a little fluid-filled pimple. And inside of that, there's the egg forming. It takes 14 days for the egg to come out in most women. So what happens is that the follicle just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger in the ovary until it literally explodes, just like the balloon, and lets out the egg. So that is an example of positive feedback. Okay, so that's all we're going to have for this particular lesson. We'll go back to talking to us in a few seconds. Just wait a few minutes and we'll get you back.